Counting.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. Almost as scheduled, a few minutes late. There's always some technical difficulties when doing these type of things, but we made our way through it. My name is Kevin Murcko. I'm here hosting. I'm co-founder of Ignium. I'm also hosting or moderating this webinar that exists between Henri and Reimo. Reimo being the CEO at Ignium and Henri, the CEO at Fundwise. So we're going to discuss a few different topics, but before we jump in, I'm going to ask both Henri and Reimo to do a quick introduction of themselves. I'll start with Reimo, so I'll pass you the mic, Reimo. Let everybody know who you are and your background.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks everyone for joining. Name is Reimo Hammerberg, and I'm co-founder of Ignium and CEO as well. So what do we do at Ignium? We help small and medium and micro-sized companies to raise money directly from their customers and do that in an affordable and efficient and fast manner. So my own background is law. I've been studying and practicing law for the almost 20 last years of my life. That's it shortly about me. So Henri, over to you.
Henri, please.
Yes, good. Greetings from my side as well. I'm Henri Laupmaa, and I have been dealing with different crowdfunding systems for the last 10 years. We first launched one reward-based system, kind of like Kickstarter in Estonia called Hooandja, and then later the equity-based Fundwise, which is now been live for approximately 6 years. And we help companies to fundraise from the investors, which could be their kind of existing user base, or could be new investors that see their campaign. So it's a kind of like micro stock market. I mean, this companies are smaller than a regular stock market, and they're raising in the range of 100,000 to 1 million.
Perfect, thank you, Henri. So obviously, I think anybody watching this webinar probably came here for a reason. Most people have heard about crowdfunding. I think just like most nuanced industries, when they first launch, there's generally a standard way of doing things, let's say one way of doing things. And then as the industry develops, you start to see differences and different types of ways that things are done. And I think in crowdfunding, we've seen something very similar. So I think it would be really important that we talk a little bit to the audience about the difference between these two specific types of crowdfunding. We're talking about kind of direct crowdfunding, which is going out and kind of trying to make your clients your investors, or your customers your investors. And the other is a more external crowdfunding where, you know, the door, let's say, might be wider open, but it doesn't necessarily focus entirely on that direct crowdfunding. So maybe Reimo, you want to start and explain a bit the difference between those two seemingly similar, at least on the face, types of crowdfunding.
Thanks, Kevin. Yes, direct community crowdfunding actually addresses the issue of funding. Both of our companies actually address the issue of funding, right? The companies lack funding. So what is Ignium's hypothesis is, and what do we deliver really to the companies, is we're saying, companies, you often have many customers. You have thousands of customers, sometimes you have tens of thousands of customers, and those customers are loyal to you. And those customers also have the means to buy your goods and services, which, you know, also cost something. So if you look at the trends on the market in general, then the retail investors as a group, they are on the rise. They're becoming more and more important. So if you simply take the kind of a broad-based logic and saying, you know, it is likely that your customers who are buying you as a company, your customers are also investors, retail investors, some of the asset groups. So what do we do, but simply in other assets, whether they buy in crypto, whether they buy, you know, public equity, whether they invest into private equity, whether they invest in crowdfunding. So what is our hypothesis? Really, what we say, companies, you all have already investors. And if you have community, it is likely that a good portion of this community could be also your investors. So with Ignium, we simply give you a tool that you will plug into your website and raise money directly from your own community. You don't need to have anybody external to give you the investors. We say many companies, big or small or even micro, you have those investors who you need. So imagine you have, 5,000 customers or community members. If 10% of them would invest 500 euros each, you have already a sizable amount. So that's what we offer. Simply you plug and play. And there is no need for a investment banker in between.
Thank you, Reimo. Great explanation. Henri, give us a bit of a background on what, let's say, just crowdfunding, or historically what crowdfunding is, how Fundwise kind of fits into that, and what the difference might be between what Reimo mentioned in terms of this direct community fundraising versus what we would generally call crowdfunding.
Yeah, no, crowdfunding is a kind of long practice, obviously. Humanity has done crowdfunding in different forms for probably hundreds or thousands of years, but as a kind of modern form, it kind of was created during the kind of rise of the internet, and probably the most well-known are the Kickstarter-like platforms, which started about 10 years ago, and 2009 was Kickstarter, and so basically they were also kind of community fundraisers. They were kind of donation reward type. So basically people donated money and got rewards as some kind of physical product or service. And from there was kind of branching of different types of equity funding like we do, or loan funding, and different subtypes. In Estonia, for example, there are real estate specific platforms like Crowd Estate and Estate Guru, and there are more generic platforms like us, Fundwise, who do all different kinds of SMEs and startups.
And how would Fundwise specifically, let's say, either differ or run in parallel to Reimo's explanation of Ignium's this direct community fundraising?
Yes, basically it's we are complementary in all the cases. Obviously, companies don't have that good user base, or the user base is not fit for raising directly, and sometimes even if they do, it's still too little, and you need more kind of visibility and promotion. So that's where we come in. We have an existing user base. Fundwise have currently close to 30,000 investors in their base. So they, plus others who see us through the social networks and media, kind of come to the projects. So they get to, for example, if they are raising money from their customers, they increase the existing customer base, plus get some of their existing customers to invest and some new people to invest. So it's a kind of mixture. So you get the promotion campaign on top of the fundraising. So that's what we do, and we also help to prepare obviously the materials for it, and so they would be ready to fundraise. So it's a kind of advisory role in addition to that.
Okay, and in terms of, let's say, the two platforms, when we talk about, if I'm raising money, one of the first things I'm going to, maybe not one of the first things, but one of the details that I'm going to look at when I go to see how I want to fundraise, whether that's going to be the traditional route of, finding an investment bank and going through that process. It's going to be the somewhat now traditional route of traditional crowdfunding, or it's going to be some nuanced version of crowdfunding or direct financing. In terms of costs to the end, is there a difference between? I mean, we're talking about, I guess, when Reimo's side, a highly, let's say, a very focused base that you're looking at in order to fundraise for your company, kind of the people that already like you, your clients, and also maybe the clients of other companies. But your focus is really, the people that probably know you best, which are your clients. And on the external side, it could be anyone. So I guess the door might be more broadly open. But is there a difference between just general costs for fundraising, the cost of capital? What does that look like? Reimo, if you want to go for Ignium, and then we'll pass it over to Henri.
Sure. Yes, there will be a difference in terms of cost, but there will be also difference in terms of, timeline, which also results in the end in cost, and also, the way the transaction is set up, because, whenever that is totally correct what Henri said, and because you will have more investors. A company may not have its own community enough to really fulfill the investment need, right? And then it needs somebody to help. And it's kind of like in a conventional investment banking, and my own background is, I've been corporate finance lawyer, capital markets lawyer. I've been, advising through hundreds of large scale fundraising transactions, and often companies need somebody to help to find the investors who would invest, right? It's a work what needs to be done. So, but in case the company doesn't need that help to find investors, in case they have those customers or the community already, and especially in case when the transaction size is smaller, because two things emerge. When the transaction size is smaller, you have the investors, but also it's very difficult to motivate external advisors because the transaction fees will be simply so small, they will not be motivating. They will not be enough to maintain the business of the external advisors, such as investment banks or for the crowdfunding companies. So in that case, when you have your own community from whom you raise the money with the help of Ignium, then we will not have any transaction fees associated with it, because it is our goal to empower with our product every single SME manager as campaign manager. It is our goal to empower them with our products. And then they simply plug it into the website, and since it's their community, their investors, it's also their money. We are not asking transaction fees because we are not really bringing the investors. We are only asking the fee for using the infrastructure. And this infrastructure enables to raise the money, keep the real-time investor register, and interact with the register, interact with the investors. So therefore, yes, the long story short, the fees, there will be no transaction fees, only a subscription fee to the infrastructure. And secondly, also the transaction timeline will be faster because there will be no typical, campaign what you will be preparing. The company simply taps to its community.
So something like fundraising as a service. That's
fundraising as a service, effectively, yes. So we turn this, or rather, Kevin, I would say, Steven, we turn the crowdfunding service into a product.
Absolutely. And from Fundwise side, Henri, so Reimo made a good point, I think, which is that costs have many aspects. So it's not, there is obviously, costs can come from different angles. And so, yeah, let us know a little bit about, in terms of the difference between the two methods about cost.
Yeah, no, the main point, I think, is that I think they are not kind of mutually exclusive or kind of, they are more like complementary methods, meaning you could use both at different times and so on. So, for example, let's say you're a B2B company that mostly deals with businesses, not direct end customers or like thousands of customers, but maybe 100 businesses. Then obviously it would be helpful to have a crowdfunding platform to help you to bring in new contacts and new investors, because the 100 businesses obviously are not all going to fund you, and you're not going to probably raise too much. And that's on one hand. And the other, when you already have a bigger user base, for example, you did one round in crowdfunding and registered your stock in Ignium, for example, then you could do second round in only Ignium and use your already existing bigger round of investors to kind of raise in the future, or raise in I can say in a year or two. So that's the kind of complementary part, because as it's kind of obvious, we have also mentioned it before that Fundwise and Ignium are cooperating. That Fundwise kind of provides the primary market and Ignium the secondary market, and management for the company side, the management of the investors for the company. And so I see them as complementary. But what comes to the cost side, obviously, to run the
I think we may have lost Henri for a moment here. Let's see if his connection stabilizes. While we're waiting, I'll jump into to another question. Oh, Henri. Okay, I'm gonna jump into the next question. We'll wait for your connection to stabilize a bit, Henri. But you did mention something that I think is important here, in that both of these kind of systems can be complementary. And so that kind of brings me to my next question, which is about when there obviously, I assume between these two explanations, there will be companies where one specific type of fundraising makes a lot of sense. And there may be, or stages of the same company where at some point in that company's life cycle, one type of crowdfunding makes more sense versus the other. So maybe, Reimo, you could touch a bit on, how that would work. Let's say, I think the more interesting one is a company, let's go from like startup all the way through to, you know, successful business, and explain maybe, you know, when external versus direct makes sense.
Well, that is a good question. Indeed, that it's kind of a when something is suitable for whom. Because as Henri said, I fully agree, those two fundraising methods are complementary, because one is business to business. What Henri said, I simply don't have the customers who would invest, because businesses usually don't invest. In vast majority of cases, they don't invest in their cooperation partner. Simply, it's not their strategy, right? And so for us, then for somebody to use Ignium should be retail facing. And again, if the company is in the very beginning, they don't have even a community, then Fundwise has that kind of community to whom you can tap in, investor community. It's not customer community, but they are investor community who are looking for the new companies, and Fundwise has a long track record of showing then, you know, the company's early stage, without even having a product, can actually raise money from their investor base. However, now when the company grows, or companies, you know, say retail facing, few years down the road, and or even less, and has already a community of, you know, say 1,000, 2,000 customers coming and going, and for example, eating or drinking the product what the company is making, or using it other ways, then, you know, and the clients clearly like the product what the company is making, otherwise they wouldn't be coming back and buying it. So then now the company can tap now to this existing community with the help of Ignium and really raise money directly from them. And we have shown that it's kind of, you know, on our own case, that this can work very successfully. So those are the, but when the now company goes further, right, say raise the money with Ignium, say, you know, I don't know, 100,000, like Aufort was raising actually, you know, close to $250,000, right? But then the company grows further, and the question is, should it now be going to crowdfunding? Yes and no, we don't know. If the company's community has been growing at the same time, then it may make sense to turn again to your own community. So this is what we did with Ignium, right? Effectively turning to our own community. That's what Coinmetro did, Kevin, your own company, turning to your own community effectively, right? And successfully. So raising millions effectively. So depending the size of your community, and we can really extrapolate that further on and say, you know, why not 10 million from your own customers? If the company really grows, the community grows. And why is that so beautiful to raise money from your own customers? Because the cost of capital is presumably lower, because the risks are lower, perceived risks are lower, because you don't have to prove to your own customers that your product is worth consuming and somebody likes it. People already like it. They know the biggest risk that somebody needs that product is already been overcome. So in that case, the kind of a quite convoluted and lengthy answer coming to a simple question is that that it really depends. It's difficult to say. For business to business products, crowdfunding platforms such as Fundwise could be a better solution, probably. Retail facing products who don't have their own community can be kind of, for them, Fundwise can be a better solution. But if you are a retail facing company, and or even e-commerce product, what we have seen, still retail facing e-commerce product like Aufort, and then you are you have your existing community, you can successfully raise money via Ignium as well. So they both coexist. Depending, for Ignium, the key question really is, do you have the community? In order to raise money from the community, do you have the community?
Yes,
okay,
so that's the question of the community plus, in the sense of, do you want to add to your community? Because when you do a campaign, obviously your own user base also grows, and meaning that people get to know your product who didn't know before, because maybe 10,000 more people or 100,000 more people will see it through the campaign. And that's like the beautiful side of it, if you can do your product communication and investment communication at the same time. But yeah, there's obviously, as Reimo said, it works well if you have a large enough community to tap into. Obviously, you can try, and if it's not enough for your community, then you can go outside and use a platform for help you to raise more or bigger personal investors. Because in our case, usually the investment size is on the smaller end, maybe 100 or 200 euros, on the higher end, maybe 20,000, 40,000, 50,000 euros. So it's a very big range of investors.
Thank you, Henri. I'm going to stick with you, Henri, for a second. I think most people, especially those tuning in to learn a bit about crowdfunding, potentially they need to raise money for a company, or they're thinking of starting a company and they don't really know where to find the capital. They don't have experience doing those type of things. So maybe we could, both sides, so we'll start with Henri, could chat a bit about a success story. So maybe a recent success story on Fundwise, the type of company, we don't have to give 100% specifics, but type of company, what they did, how you helped them, and kind of, what that success story looks like in the end for that company.
The one simple of the recent success stories, one drinks company who did healthy drinks, and they were really early stage, meaning they didn't have any customers yet. They have just produced the first batches and got good reviews, and basically were ready to start production. And we've found one good lead investor to them, who is kind of well known in the community as well. And thanks to that, they raised in only a couple of days, without having a real user base yet, the full sum, and they raised the ceiling a bit to get more money in. And now they are in production, and they already have a growing user base of real customers, meaning not only test customers. That's
very cool. Very cool. So nice example of a company kind of along the same lines that you both spoke of, which is brand new, no user base, definitely selling something to a retail, or wanting to sell something to a retail public, but no clients to sell to yet, and thus great success story on the Fundwise side. Reimo, you have a recent success story from Ignium side.
Yes, our most recent or closed customer project was e-commerce customer, but also retail facing, and the name of it is Aufort, selling digital gold and turning the gold into a kind of commerce product. And they simply did it by themselves without any intermediaries. And the reason they actually came to us at some point wasn't even the quite high cost, which is usually associated with a crowdfunding, but it was really the time scale or the time needed. Kind of all crowdfunding platforms said, they checked also with Funderbeam that it takes months to prepare. There is a waiting list. You need a lead investor, etc., and all which are kind of like a barriers to entering the market. So they really kind of came, plugged into the infrastructure, and were running their campaign and raised successfully, in short 2 weeks, 250,000. So which is, if you look in general statistics, which I told them as well, that it's kind of, if you look all the successful campaigns in the world, successful campaigns, crowdfunding, done through external crowdfunding platforms, then 250K is above average of the successful campaign. So they themselves, without any intermediaries, without any, anybody giving them the digital phone book, so to speak, were able to raise money above average, which, gives us a clear sign of, how capacitated are actually the SMEs. And because they are able to create content, they are able to engage community, they are able to interact in the era of Web 2, where everybody effectively can create content and interact with the world. So all what they need, in our opinion, is the infrastructure. So they can save time and they can save costs. So that's our success story. Just in 2 weeks, 250,000 on their own, without any external, investor pool.
Amazing.
And the greatest success of that, all 250K belongs to them. That's the greatest success.
Okay, Henri, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think it's a great success story, and I'm happy for them. That there's a couple of characteristics that you need to have. One is your capability to kind of good communication or internet-based communication yourself, probably within your team or as a supportive of the team. And the second is because I think actually the biggest cost of the campaign is not external costs, but your internal costs of your time and your communications and basically the work you have to put into the campaign or into the materials of the campaign and so on. So this is usually for company the biggest cost for doing fundraising of this kind. And for this outward type of thing to be successful, I think they have to have a good, for example, the website has to be well visited, or their existing channels, be it social media, has to be well visited, so they could automatically get directed to invest.
Yeah, I think we've already discussed a bit about kind of the differences between that direct versus let's say indirect or external versus internal fundraising. Definitely, there's as Reimo had mentioned already, there's a nuance to cost. So you can, there's going to be cost somewhere no matter what you do in life. Sometimes you might get the $0 down at cost, and then there's cost on the back end. Sometimes you get the cost right up front. I think the point is, though, at least what I glean from this information is that there are definitely companies where they do have this innate ability to kind of get their clients emotional. There's this emotional kind of attachment to the company, and thus they are willing, probably with very little coaxing, to come and help that company succeed because they have an emotional attachment. They've already using the products and services, etc. I think the cool thing about that, at least again, what I gleaned from the conversation, is that it's not necessarily that can't happen on other platforms. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, Reimo, but Ignium's, I would assume there's a premise here of there was a hypothesis in the beginning. Maybe you can talk a bit about what the hypothesis was when Ignium started in terms of this direct fundraising, and if that hypothesis has been proven by that last success story you mentioned, Offwork.
Yes, Kevin, and it very much actually relates to also what Henri said, because company needs to have its, before starting to move with that, we indeed had a hypothesis that, what needs to be there in order for this strategy to be successful. And as Henri said as well, the first hypothesis was that are companies capable? First of all, are they capable of putting it together? Secondly, are they able to bring their own customers as their investors to Ignium? And then, therefore making it a successful and happy campaign. Are the companies joining? Are the companies capable? And are they able really to trigger themselves, their own users? And, will the cost, exactly the cost part, what we are discussing, will that be prohibitive in terms of, simply the, management time, which needs to be put in? And, these first cases are validating clearly that there is a niche, or kind of I would say not even a niche, a kind of what we view as a massive market out there, that yes, companies are capable of doing that. They're usually retail facing and have emotional products, as you described those, and they are bringing their own users, or they are bringing their own investors. They don't need investors from anybody else. So the companies as such are there. So, but the note on yes, and we had a hypothesis like that, which was, has been nicely validated on the first case, and now on the next project, which we are, which are on their way, hopefully it will continue. At the same time, there will be use case, what we have been discussing, really for also, so what I'm trying to say here is crowdfunding companies have been around, what Henri knows better, more than 10 years, I believe. Kickstarter maybe longer even, I believe close to 15 years. I believe they were founded in 2009, right? One of the biggest at the moment, right? And all crowdfunding external platforms, they have been doing amazing job, right? Funding the companies which are out there and in need of funding, because SME funding problem is a well documented and it's massive. But if you take all the crowdfunding platforms and all their projects and sum them up, then they address, I believe, less than maybe 5% of the companies in total funding need. Because the funding need is, well been documented by EBRD, by, IMF, by international organizations. There are approximately, 16 million SMEs out there with a funding need, small and micro companies, many of which are retail facing. So what I'm simply saying, there is a place for everyone. The hypothesis has been well validated, and there is a place for everyone in the market.
Yes, I agree. And definitely it should be wider scale. And I think one of the reasons is also that it has been maybe more kind of startup centric, or there's been more startup companies that are funded rather than the kind of regular classical SMEs, I mean, like product companies and service companies, which are obviously the majority of companies in existence. So they are rather underserved. So that's also the reason why we are doing mostly the kind of classical SMEs. So we have maybe like 90% classical and 10% startups in the mix of who come to us and who we help to get funded.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think each platform, and there's a good amount of crowdfunding platforms that have popped up. Obviously, Kickstarter definitely was the first one I've ever seen. I think Indiegogo in the US was maybe the second, and then Europe started to explode, and there was many platforms that started to tackle similar problems regionally or internationally, and then blockchain came in, and now we have a whole kind of new world of fundraising, which leads to a really good question, I think, which is the future of crowdfunding. So we know what's happened, or we have a kind of an idea of what's happened in the last 10, 15 years. Kickstarter started off as, fund my project, I'll give you a t-shirt. And that only goes so far, I think. Not everybody's willing to give money to someone to become successful to get a t-shirt or a pat on the back. And we started to move towards, equity crowdfunding. We started to move towards different types of fundraising. So where do we see, and this time we'll start with Henri, where do you see the future of crowdfunding? And I have one other caveat to add on to that. We talked, both of you mentioned Kickstarter, so have I. So Kickstarter had some news recently about going down the blockchain decentralized path and kind of revamping, and starting with a new company that potentially maybe becomes their only company at some point. And so the caveat there is, maybe we can discuss a bit about that Kickstarter in general, but does the tech make it better? Do you see all crowdfunding platforms moving to this new technology? Does it make a difference? Is there a reason to go down that path? And then just in general, the future of, like, where do you see crowdfunding in the next 5, 10, 15 years? Where is it headed, Henri?
For clarification, I think the wave, or the current wave, started in 2008, or the first wave of crowdfunding as platforms. And Indiegogo was actually first, and Kickstarter second, which is the brand is better known. So Kickstarter is the kind of synonym for kind of rewards crowdfunding. And the equity platform started in Europe in 2011 with UK. So it's around 10 years now. But obviously the crypto kind of blockchain-based things have kind of becoming more in fashion, and definitely they have some of the potential advantages. For example, the kind of DAO type of companies where you want to have the basically community-driven companies, meaning that the people have a vote or some kind of say in how the company is run, or where the protocol or what is being built is being directed towards. So in this regard, I think the blockchain-based things are definitely going to be part of the future. Are they the only future? I'm not so sure. I think they are not needed in all cases, but definitely they are in fashion, and it's growing. The first wave was actually 2017 when the ICO boom, but now it's more, there was very much hype there, and I think now it's more again substantial, or there's more content to it than just hype.
So, and in general, let's say the future of outside of the tech, but do you see changes coming in crowdfunding, whether that be from some external pressure, whether that be regulation, or whether that be just from what people are looking for, the fact that the investors are changing? I mean, Gen Z and Gen Y investors are much different than investors that came, 30, 40 years before, what they want, where they're, how they want to invest, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing is probably at some point we will see like bigger platforms emerge, meaning like through mergers or other things. So I think this is still a couple of years in the future, but there will be less maybe variation and more kind of standardized offerings across Europe, definitely as one entity, because the European market has been very fragmented, and it's now being kind of drawn more closer together thanks to the new crowdfunding regulation, or partly because of the crowdfunding regulation. And this also means licensing for most of the platforms by the end of next year, and which also it raises the kind of bureaucracy and cost probably for running the platforms. And that's might be also be one of the drivers why there will be mergers.
Okay. I'll pass the same question on, well, questions, I guess, on to you.
Okay. Yes, when you look at the same trends of, Kevin, what you mentioned here, this emergence of blockchain, and this, in my opinion, also the Kickstarter news is very interesting. So I was also reading this morning and thinking that it's kind of, why are they doing this? I mean, they are one of the most successful platforms in the world. And in my own opinion, is one of the reasons is two things. A, the current model is stalled, right? Slowing down, it doesn't grow anymore in such a fashion. And secondly, there is a kind of a need for a more of an infrastructure type of the solution, because the Web 2 has brought really people to the place. Everybody, or most of us who want, are able and capable of producing high-level content and putting it up. So everybody is able to communicate effectively, right? So everybody is becoming editor. Everybody is becoming content creator, right? So, and if you combine that with this kind of, now this emerging investor base, is there a really need for the investor pool as a service anymore, right? Or advisory service? Of course, advisory service, I'm coming with the advisory background. Of course, there is a need for it. I believe in that. But that is one side. Kickstarter news, kind of two things, in my opinion. The business model as such is stalling, and they need kind of a future solution. What they're speaking about is a more of an infrastructure type, right? And for that purpose, when you start to speak about infrastructure, digital infrastructure, blockchain is a kind of a natural solution where to go. I mean, simply, and I'm not saying blockchain creates trust. No, blockchain doesn't create trust. Governance creates trust. Governance is created by the engineers, and whatever the engineers' codes should be audited. And we have all those blockchain issues, but blockchain creates lots of efficiency. Efficiency meaning saving of costs. And you can create really kind of, a lot of, self-running governance, which is very efficient and reliable on the back of blockchain. So in this sense, I kind of get where they're going. And the second trend, this is a technology trend combined with the Kickstarter news. And the second trend is really the regulation, what the Henri brought in. And in my opinion, usually what regulation means is there is a need, costs are going higher, the revenue needs to go higher, means only one thing, that the transactions must go larger. And for me, coming from the, from the advising of the investment banking sector for, more than a decade, it makes sense. That's how investment banks work. They always aim for the higher transactions. So that's why when you look around in a crowdfunding space, you see always kind of this promotion language that is, come to us, we make 1 million and north transactions. Come to us, we make 1 million possible. Come to us, etc. So everybody's toying with the high numbers, and the reason is very simple: the underlying economics. Because crowdfunding, in the end, as Henri said, also it's a service, and you have to make it a sustainable business. Hence, the transaction size is getting larger. But the future, what the future would hold, on the other hand, the needs of the companies haven't changed that much. Still, a massive number of those micro and small companies out there, they don't need €1 million, right? Like ICO projects didn't need 10 millions, right? They actually need smaller money. So in that case also, I say there is a need for smaller transactions, and hence the infrastructure type of solution is needed there as well, where companies can efficiently raise smaller amounts, because my bet is that the crowdfunding as a service, as a platform service, they will go for the larger transactions. They're already aiming for million north. They will go even higher, because just to make the business, maintainable.
Absolutely. By the way, the ICOs.
other side of it is, sorry, the other side of it is that some smaller transactions are going to be more automatized, or like, let's say, maybe like 50 or 100,000 fundraise will be as standardized and automatized, so that there wouldn't be any kind of advisory or kind of handwork needed so much, manual work.
Yeah, so I guess, sorry, it raises another question, I think, just in that many times in finance, as things mature, we sometimes circle back and the system, I would say, changes in a way that the first premise, helping the little guy in this helping the small SME, may get lost in the shuffle. So do we think that even though if regulation is going to bring, raise costs, and other external factors are going to increase costs, that there won't be a market in the next 5-10 years, or the market will start to move away from let's help the small SMEs in this gap that has these funding issues, to let's just go back to funding the larger 10 million, 100 million, whatever plus, because that's where the money is. Do we think that that's going to happen, or do we believe that we're actually going to be changing something here, where there actually is going to be a more vibrant market for smaller SMEs in the future? We can start with Henri on that one, since Reimo went first last time.
Could you repeat the last part of the question? I didn't.
Sure. Both of you were discussing kind of outside influences starting to move price. So where now, let's say, crowdfunding is still new, relatively speaking. Thus, there is, regulation hasn't yet really come, or hasn't come heavy-handed in many ways. There is new regulation in the EU, for example. However, it's still fairly easy to comply. So the question is, in many cases, when there is a nuanced market that is created to fill a gap, but then regulation or other external factors cause prices to go too high, other external factors cause that business to change, those nuanced businesses that came to help that gap, or it was a large gap in this case, these small SMEs, start to revert and go back to do larger transactions and forget about the small guys because of those changes. So the question is, do you think that in the future, there still will be a market, a growing market for those small SMEs, or are we going to forget about them again and they will get kind of lost like they have in traditional finance for years?
I think the answer to that is partly in the last discussion of this blockchain-based kind of equity raises and the new solution. So I think this will become a standard, so everybody can use it pretty easily. So like in the last wave, we kind of got used to social media and our kind of content production and so on. So the next wave will be more like this kind of tokenization and all the services built on top of that. I think one good indication is also that the big central banks are getting into the cryptocurrency play, like the ECB, the Fed, the Chinese central bank. So they try to get it standardized as well, or create a digital version of their cash, and so lots of other services also will be standardized in this way, like how do you give out shares of your company, or how you vote in your shareholders meeting, or services like that. So which also means that the fundraising will get easier, or more standard and automatic for the SMEs. So I don't think they will get lost, but obviously the high-end, more work-intense things will focus on the bigger deals, but kind of more standardized, less manual work cases will be still served.
Thank you, Henri. Reimo, any comments?
Yes, I believe it's kind of, I will start with one analogy here. How usually kind of a new nascent areas are starting. Take, for example, Airbnb. How did it start, right? Airbnb is kind of, in this sense, of course, sounds good always to compare yourself to Airbnb, but how did they start, really? They had a kind of, a travelers, and then simply those travelers needed some affordable place to stay, and simply people having an extra square meter or two in their apartments offered an airbed, right? That's how it started, right? Airbnb, right? So, but then it was really kind of a nuanced low-end segment of the market. So it started, when then people said, oh, why don't I rent out the entire room? Oh, why don't I rent out the entire apartment? Oh, why don't I rent out a luxury house? And now it really has gone up in the vertical, but the low end is still being served, right? But that's how a new industry always starts. Doesn't mean that it's abandoned necessarily, but that's how it usually starts. So your question, Kevin, in this sense is fair. I believe the answer is still there in the infrastructure part itself. If we give them the infrastructure effectively, how the companies can really connect well with their community also for fundraising purposes, then the small transactions are not necessarily maybe automated, but we effectively give them IKEA furniture, right? Everybody is able to become a designer themselves by putting together the IKEA furniture, right? So everybody is then able to put together, like IKEA furniture, their own fundraising campaign, right? And then they get the knowledge, they have the community, right? And then, the products like Ignium will make them a successful campaign manager, like IKEA is making everyone a successful, installer of the furniture, effectively, making you all a little engineers, right? So in this sense, I believe many successful industries have been started always from the niche market, creating a network there, building it up in the vertical. I believe also this community-based funding will reach more also to medium-sized enterprise sector, but it takes time because simply the biggest pain is currently on the micro and small level.
Yeah, I'm absolutely a failed IKEA engineer. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Absolutely failed. How many times I got to the last screw and realized that screw should go somewhere else, and then had to undo the whole thing. So
that's also Murphy's law that when you assemble the thing, then there's always a couple of screws left over some parts.
Yeah, unless it's IKEA where they give you the exact amount of screws, and they all look pretty much the same size, except they're like 0.5 millimeter off. So yeah, great. But shout out to IKEA, great business model. I have a question I think that kind of popped in my head throughout this entire discussion, and how can I frame it in this way? So, I mentioned earlier, like talking about traditional investors, let's say people that come from, what was the generation before millennials? I don't even remember at this point, but I forget what we're called. Pepsi generation or something like that? I don't remember. Point is that older individuals, at least in the past, have looked at, when they invest because they're going to make a profit. That was the reason for investing. Now, and when we get through kind of millennial, Gen X, and Gen Z, and Gen Y now, and then probably Gen Z as well, when they come of age, it seems that a lot of people have become kind of impact investors. So they're looking for a way to potentially change the world or feel like they're helping positive change when they invest. It's not so much about a return on investment. So one, I would ask, do you guys generally agree with that statement? And then two, how do you think that is going to affect investing in general, but also crowdfunding? And I think that in different ways, how it may affect that internal crowdfunding, like when you're looking just at your client base, versus when you're looking externally across, a much wider swath of the population. So Reimo, if you want to start this time.
Yes, Kevin, it's kind of I believe it's well researched and established that people are not going for the financial return anymore. People want to have an impact, and this kind of goes so well in line with Maslow pyramid in general. People are looking for the impact, kind of the legacy, what they are leaving behind, right? And and this kind of a crowdfunding in general, community funding, goes perfectly hand in hand. And also the other big trend in line with that is, disintermediation. And that combined with this, impact funding on different directions, I'm voting for different notions with my wallet in life. So that's definitely, that's on the back of this crowdfunding was born, I believe, right? And definitely it's the backbone of our strategy as well here. Because in the end, again, to say we are resolving the same problem, right? We are simply saying there is a blind spot that crowdfunding platforms are not addressing, and we will take care of that.
Do you think that this impact investing and what Henri had mentioned earlier, DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations, giving governance back to the people that invest, is something that's going to catch fire or catch steam because of the fact that we have all these impact investors coming into the market, wanting to be able not only to make a change, but maybe even help foster that change from inside of the organization rather than just with their wallet?
Was that question to me or Henri?
It was to you, just a follow-up on the first question.
Okay. That is a very deep question. I will give a very short answer. So governance is a much more nuanced topic, and the DAO itself, it's not really decentralized governance. There is no such thing as decentralized governance. Governance is done by the people, right? And it needs to be flexible, but it can really give a lot of efficiency. Take a lot of standard decisions and standard conflict of interest situations out of the equation. But in the end, governance and trust is created by the people. So I think it's would it be fair to say it's not decentralized governance, but a semi-decentralized governance, or governance always will be centralized to some extent. And it doesn't need to be fully decentralized. We have seen the problems when it becomes too decentralized.
Thank you, Reimo. Henri?
I think that the governance issue is tends to be unpacked here with this, we could have a 1 hour discussion on only this aspect. So I'd rather not get too deep into that. But I agree with Reimo on that there is no silver bullet solution for that or technical solution for that. It's more like human working together solution of how humans interact and what are the rules and common practices. And it's more important than this technical framework. But what comes to the impact investment on this side, because I think it's a very relevant question, and it's also one reason why people invest more, or at least the Kickstarter thing also started, that I put money in there not because I want some kind of product, but I want to make things happen. Meaning, if I don't put the money, these things never get made, or this product or service or whatever they are building, or artwork. And the same goes to the crowdfunding things. But not obviously the impact investment is very different in different societies. I would say, for example, if I look at what Swedes or the UK people are doing, I think the impact investment is much more there, and in Estonia it's less there. But it's going in the same direction, just with a little lag, because we haven't had so long practice with it yet. And definitely the environmental field, and in the health and healthy food and so on, it's already visible. And in our case as well, we have funded solar energy, and we funded some food products which are for the better world and better health type of mission, let's say. So the company's mission is becoming more important for both all kinds of stakeholders, including investors.
Thank you, Henri. So I think I'm going to save a bit of time here so that you guys can give some final comments and let people know how they can contact you and where they should look if they want some more information on exactly what Ignium and Fundwise does. Before I do that, just I guess one final comment from myself, just to say that having been around crowdfunding for at least as a customer from probably its inception, because I was a client or investor on both Indiegogo and Kickstarter when they first came out, and to see the progression, I do think that we are headed down a path that hopefully eventually fills in this gap, this SME gap. I've had a lot of small companies that have had to raise money, and it's never easy. And having platforms like Fundwise and like Ignium that didn't exist, 10, 20 years ago, when I had to raise money, I think if they existed then, I would have had a much easier time. And I think it's great that the whole world is headed down this. I think impact investing is great, but aside from impact investing, just your ability to be able to go out and fundraise without having to be on the VIP list of the advisor. And if you don't fit the category, you don't fit what they're looking for, you just don't gain entry. So I got into this entire business on the crypto side, on the Ignium side, because of access. I think that's the major thing that we're collectively changing, and I think that's amazing. So with the last few minutes we have available, I'll let Reimo go first. Just final thoughts, let people know how they can contact you or the company, website, etc., all those great details, and then we'll pass it on to Henri.
Yes, when you have a company which is retail facing, has a community, and needs to grow and needs funding, then please reach out to us, and at my email, which is reimo@ignium.io, or at my direct phone number, which is 50-176-32, and then let's chat how we can help. If no, then let us know who could be interested. And other than that, I simply thank you for joining, and hope you found something useful out of today's discussion.
Thank you, Reimo. Henri?
Thanks, Kevin, for moderating. It's really interesting to have a chat with you, and that we could continue in some other topics that we kind of opened today. On us, if you want to contact us, our site is fundwise.me, and my address is henri@fundwise.me, and my number is 55-24542. And so any feedback or recommendations are welcome, also if you want advisory. So and thanks you all for listening in. All the best.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. That's it. We're going to wrap it up there. Definitely check out Ignium, check out Fundwise, ignium.io, and fundwise.me. Have a great day, everybody.
All the best.